This video is sponsored by the new Only Crits Kickstarter. If you and your group like to play in D&D campaigns that are focused on your player characters, like the cast of Critical Role does, then if a player misses a session, it could be really disruptive. After all, whenever a player can't make it to a game, there are going to be lots of options for how you could excuse their character's absence. But if you and your fellow players are passionate about maintaining a cohesive narrative, then some of those options won't be available to you. You won't like the idea of just having a player character stand off to the side, completely unacknowledged by anybody and unharmed by any traps or monsters until the player returns. You won't like the idea that the character just blinks out of existence and reemerges in the next session when Dave doesn't have to work late this week. They just don't feel real to you, and that realism really matters in this scenario. This is why some people have absent characters being played by the game master, so they can still feel like they're in conversations that they would be a part of, they still feel like they're in the continuity of the world. However, the game master often has a lot on their plate, and it's not really their responsibility to also keep track of a player character. There's a reason why we don't tend to suggest game masters should use player character sheets for their NPCs, because it's a lot to keep track of. So sometimes the solution might just be that the other players should play that character while the player is gone. So that's what we're talking about today. What are some things you need to know when you're going to play somebody else's player character? And we're going to try to get through this video without some sort of weird, wacky cartoon character popping up and making my life more difficult. Including me? No, of course not, Winnie the Pooh. You've been a part of my channel for a long time now. You are always here to deliver information about a sponsor, so you're fine. Okay, good. In fact, do you want to do the ad read right now? Oh, I was going to say, do you want to do the video? No, please, we're already on you. No, I didn't have anything planned for right now. I'm good to do it later. No, go ahead, do your thing. No, please. Winnie the Pooh, please, I insist. Mike, please, you first. Can we just do your part of the video? Whoa. Mike? Yeah, I'm here. And it looks like... Yep, we switched bodies. Oh no, so what, I'll have to do the entire video like this? Tell you what, why don't we stick with what we were supposed to do? You still read the ad and I'll still do the main video, and then hopefully we can figure out what caused this and get things back to normal. In the meantime, do you want to start? Okay, I guess I'll start. So what are we talking about today? Oh, right. Playing other people's characters. Now, I talked about this a little bit in another video a couple of years ago, but it's worth discussing again because I think there's a lot of nuance to how you actually handle running somebody else's character at the table. And the first and most important rule, as always, is just communication. Obviously, if another player can't make it to the game, that's unfortunate. Nobody wants that. Whenever they let you know that they're not going to be able to come to the table, then as a group, communicate with them and find out how they want you to handle their character. If they're okay with somebody else playing their character while they're gone, ask them if they have a preference for who should do it. Find out if they have any suggestions or requests for the player who's running their character, and we'll come back to that in a minute. Make sure that whatever happens when they get back to the table, it's not a total surprise. When I was in college, during my second ever D&D campaign, I played a dwarf fighter, Rurik Baldirk, aka Roach. We were playing through Red Hand of Doom, and then after the second session, I got cast in a play for the theater department, and the rehearsals absolutely dominated my schedule, and I couldn't make it to most of the games. And honestly, for a good chunk of the campaign, I was just gone. And when I was able to pop in for a few minutes at the end of a session, I would hear about cool things that were happening, and I felt so left out. But I have no idea how they handled my character while I was gone. I know he was still in the game, but even to this day, I don't know who played him, if anyone. But that was also, early 2008? We didn't have texting culture the way we do today, where I could easily shoot off a text and ask somebody to run my character, and I would be in the loop. I was the note-taker of the group, so without me, I really wasn't getting the full debriefs of what was happening in each session. In some ways, this was just a communication problem between a bunch of 19-year-olds. But in other ways, a lot of it just wouldn't happen the same way again today, because the way we all communicate with each other has changed so drastically. We have group text threads now, which is a huge game changer when it comes to running D&D games, in ways that I don't think we often appreciate. There was another time in college when I missed one session. I wasn't chronically absent like I was for Red Hand of Doom, but I missed most of one game. And when I got back to the dorm, two people I didn't know had been playing my character. And that felt very weird. They were friends of someone in the group, I don't remember who, but they were visiting their friend. They weren't really total strangers to the group, but I didn't know them and they didn't know me and they didn't know my character. If I'd been given the choice of who was going to run my character while I was gone, I wouldn't have picked them. And that is nothing against them. I just wish someone had asked me and let me know that a few strangers would be running my character. But if that happened today, I think they would have asked and it would have been fine. The other reason it's so important to communicate with the absent player is so they can pass along any standing commands, things that are going to inform how they want you to run their character. This might mean that they tell you how their character generally fights, like what kinds of spells are really useful. I think this is more likely if you have a little bit more time to prepare. After all, if somebody can't make it to a game because of a last-minute obligation, it's probably not reasonable to expect that player to try to download a bunch of information to the other players. Maybe just a few quick tips, but nothing major. On the other hand, if you know for more than a week that you're not going to be able to make it to a session, and you want somebody else to play your character for you, some players will want to give their understudies a little bit more of a guide on how to run their character. After all, D&D characters are somewhat complex. They can be kind of daunting to jump into a new one that you haven't been playing, and nobody wants you to get a character killed because you didn't know what you were doing. Although, again, more on that in a minute. If you're the kind of player who uses flow charts to keep track of what moves to make in combat, you may just want to snap a picture of your charts and send them to the player who's going to be playing on your behalf, so they have as much information as possible. However, I think there is a point where too much communication can be a bad thing. In Critical Role, sometimes if a player was absent, somebody else would play the character. This happened a lot with Ashley Johnson in Campaign 1, and while they usually tried to write her out for those extended periods where she couldn't be at a game, sometimes she could come to a game and her character would come along on an adventure, and then she couldn't come to the next game, but Pike would still be with the party, so somebody else would play the character. Or sometimes the party just wanted her character to be part of the adventure, so they brought her along, either so Ashley had the opportunity to drop in if she could get some time off work, or they brought her just because that's what their characters would do. And occasionally, Ashley could watch the game remotely, probably because she was stuck on the blind spot set but still able to watch Twitch, and so she could text with suggestions. She could clarify and say that she did have a certain magic item that would allow her to get across the battlefield and heal somebody, for example. Something similar happened a couple of times during Campaign 2 when Laura couldn't come to a game, but she could watch it from home and text suggestions. I think the cast of Critical Role can get away with this for a couple of reasons. First of all, they're live streaming their game. The other players can literally stay informed about what's going on. You don't have to keep texting them updates. I think in our home games, the only way to keep someone in the loop would be through constant texting, and that would border at disruptive behavior at the table. But the second reason this approach works for them is because, above everything else, the most important thing to the cast of Critical Role is that the world feels real. The characters must behave in rational ways, and sometimes that means disregarding contrivances that are there because of the format of the game. They don't like the idea that their characters wouldn't bring another hero along with them for no other reason other than that hero's player is not at the table. That doesn't feel like a good enough reason to them most of the time. I made a video last year about the differences between narrative-first game masters and simulationist-first game masters, but I think you could say the same thing about a group of players. And make no mistake, the group on Critical Role really values treating the world like a real place. They don't like it when they can feel the hand of the author. They are simulationists. If something happens in the game, they want it to feel like it's what absolutely would have happened. So if Laura feels like the only way to make sure her character would do what she would do is to just constantly text her husband, that's the method they take. We likely aren't streaming our own games, so trying to get real-time updates from an absent player is going to slow things down for everyone at the table. That's why, rather than trying to offer insight in the moment during a game, instead you really need to make sure that you trust the other players at the table to be responsible with your character. Because if you don't, then you may as well just write that character out for a session. Or if you're stuck at home but you're not otherwise occupied with other obligations, just zoom into the game. Well, that makes it sound like you could zoom, like zooming moving very fast. Like, zoom over to the game, like drive over there. I mean, using Zoom to interact in the game. You know, we never had this problem with Skype. Skype had lots of problems, but when it comes to a name, we never got confused about what we were talking about. Anyway, this actually opens up another interesting possibility for the way you can run an absent player's character. Do you open it up to consensus from the table? I think it's okay to have multiple people running one character. Despite my own bad experience with it, I have seen it work really well on Critical Role, especially at higher levels, when the characters get a lot more complex. 2 players would run high-level Pike, or Scanlan that one time that Sam couldn't make it the game. Running a second character is a lot of work, so it helps a lot to share the load with a second player. You can trust that if they don't agree with each other, they're going to talk about it, and they're going to be able to come to a consensus that makes sense. They're both going to try to make sure that they're doing what their character would do, what your character would do. It gives them a chance to share the burden of learning a new class and looking up rules. Like, one person can look up rules while the other person is actually figuring out placement or strategy or counting squares on the table. However, what about opening it up for the rest of the players to weigh in as well? Because if you try to get input from the entire table, that's when I think there are maybe too many cooks in the kitchen. Just like trying to text the absent player during a game, asking the entire group what this character should do next is going to slow things down. But on the other hand, I do think sometimes it's valuable to say, hey, do we all agree that this player would do X in this moment? And the rest of the players can say, yes, I think that makes sense. because ultimately, you might have an idea for how that character would react in a given situation, but the rest of the party might feel differently. But if you all can come to a consensus, then you can bring your ideas together and form a collage of the impressions you've received of that player character and try to make a more complete picture. When Sam couldn't make it to an episode of Critical Role and his character was in the middle of developing a drug problem, I think most of us would typically just say, okay, that drug storyline is on pause right now. But like I said earlier, that is not how this game runs. So Sam gave his fellow players instructions on what his character would do when he would take drugs. And while I personally think anything significant should wait until the player is back with the group, I do think it's a useful example of what we're talking about right now. Marisha and Taliesin were in charge of running Scanlan, and he basically gave them some criteria for when his character would take some more drugs. And when it seemed like they were in that situation, those players said, he's going to take some drugs. And then they basically turned to the rest of the group and said, right, this feels like the scenario that Sam gave us. And the others agreed, yes, this is exactly the kind of situation where that would happen, based on what Sam told us about what his character is going through. That is a major moment in the story, and it's the kind of thing that I would not normally want to have happen when the player wasn't at the table. Except in this case, the player specifically requested that the other players continue with that storyline while he was gone. But those other players would obviously want to make sure they were doing it within the proper situation. They want to make sure that what they're doing makes sense, that it is actually what Scanlan would do if Sam was at the table. So by opening it up to the rest of the group for consensus, they could all agree that this felt like the right situation for that, and they felt pretty good about making that choice in the moment. However, again, this can easily go too far. I really don't recommend taking this tactic in combat, especially because I think it's going to slow the game down dramatically if you ask everyone at the table to weigh in on every turn. And if you're in a role-playing scene and the opportunity comes along for this character to speak, well, first of all, you want to avoid that whenever possible for obvious reasons, but even if that moment does come along, you don't want to run every sentence past the rest of the party for approval, because again, that will take forever. But if there's a major moment where you do think the character would do something drastic, I think it's fair to pitch that to the rest of the players. I think Pike would focus on healing rather than attacking the dragon this turn. Do we all agree with that? Or vice versa. I think Pike would focus on trying to kill the dragon because she knows she could try to heal everybody next turn if the dragon is dead. Major choices like that are going to shape the entire combat, and when other players' lives might be put on the line, or this character might be in danger in exceptional circumstances, outside of just like typical danger from being in combat, if it's a particularly unique situation, I think that's a good opportunity to open it up to the crowd and make sure you're all on the same page. However, you also don't want to run the risk of there being too many cooks in the kitchen and the character acting in irrational ways. Again, that time in college when I came home and found two people playing my character, I didn't love that feeling, but part of the reason why is because the moment I walked through the door, they were in the middle of a combat on a couple of ships, and my party turned to me and they told me, hey, your character has multiple personalities now. That was how they were rationalizing the fact that my character was doing radically different things depending on what turn it was, which was happening because my character was being controlled by two players and they didn't know my character, and apparently maybe couldn't even come to a consensus sometimes. Now, nobody thought I was going to bring that element of that character into future sessions. I wasn't forced to play a character with dissociative identity disorder just because I couldn't make it to a single session and two people helped out. At that moment, when I heard that, I may have been wondering how I was going to integrate this into my character, but I don't think anybody else was taking it that seriously. It was a joke. However, the fact that these players couldn't seem to reconcile how to play my character didn't make me feel amazing about the way my character had been treated. I want to be clear, I am not putting any of my former party members on blast or their friends who were helping out. We were college kids. We're much more mature role players now. Something like this would just not happen today, and not just because we have texting now. I think it's a pretty extreme example and one that is not likely to manifest exactly that way in your own games. But even if it doesn't go that far, it's still possible that the other players who are playing your character might not be on the same page as you, let alone as each other. And that's not an incredible feeling. However, the core problem was not that there were two people running the character, because I do think that can work well. Being able to share the responsibility is going to make the situation go much more smoothly. I'd actually love to see someone do that properly, like in an actual situation where they do know the character, because I want to see that other people can also do it besides just the cast of Critical Role. And speaking of sharing responsibility, let's turn things over to our only crit spokesman, Winnie the Pooh. Are you sure I should still read the ad today? Yeah, man, of course, that's your job. You don't think it's going to be distracting to have my voice coming out of your body? We sound so different. We do sound very different, but I think people will understand the situation that we're in. All right, if you say so. Hello there, Winnie the Pooh here to tell you all about today's sponsor, Only Crits, and the new Kickstarter for Fuck Dice. Only Crits is a fantastic company we've been working with for a few years now, and they have a truly incredible selection of dice. And right now they're running a Kickstarter for a new collection of fuck dice. Only Crits is a fantastic selection of all kinds of dice that say fuck you on the 20 and fuck me on the 1, which they've created through their previous Kickstarter campaigns. And they're launching another Kickstarter for another collection of fuck dice. And this time the campaign includes even more material, like dice inspired by gemstones and stained glass. The team at Only Crits always runs a great Kickstarter campaign, and this is your chance to be a part of their next one, and get your hands on some cheeky dice with some fun curses on them. So check out the affiliate link in the description and sign up for the Kickstarter for Only Crits Fuck Dice. Once again, check out the Fuck Dice at the link in the description. And thank you so much to Only Crits for sponsoring this video. Cheerio! Okay, so we've talked about some of the potential pitfalls that come from having another player at the table run your character for you. And this raises a question. Should the GM just do it themselves? I'm not really recommending that in this video because, quite frankly, the GM has enough on their plate during a game. But also, the GM is in the exact same position as the players. They're still trying to replicate the version of your character that they have in their head, which may mean that they would make choices that the player wouldn't. I think the reason we default to suggesting that it should be the GM instead of the other players is because we assign the GM so much power to control the narrative. They are the authority on every aspect of the world, and for some people, that includes the player characters, especially when a player isn't there. Whether or not that's true depends on your group. I've definitely been in some groups where the GM did not know the player characters as well as the other players did. And yet, when it was time to control the player character, we would always check with the GM first. But it might also not be as complicated as I'm making it sound. It might just be that we're used to Game Masters doing lots of different voices, and other players don't have to do that. Game Masters are responsible for playing lots of different characters in realistic ways, and players aren't. They just have their one character. It naturally just feels more authoritative when a GM runs a character rather than having one of the fellow players do it. There's also the assumption that the Game Master knows all the rules, so if anybody's going to play an entirely different player character, it should be them. That is something I've pushed back against in the past. I don't think the Game Master needs to know all the rules. I think it's too much to expect from them. But if the Game Master has the bandwidth to control that character during dialogue scenes or sequences when you're not in initiative, I think it's fair for them to do so. But I still maintain that running the character in combat should really be the responsibility of another player. However, there's another aspect to why people suggest it should be the Game Master who runs that character and not everybody else in the party. And that's the idea that the Game Master is going to be fair, and you can't be sure that your fellow players will be. They might have you spend all of your money as a joke, or because it means they don't have to spend their own, because they're playing their characters who they care about a lot and they've put a lot of work into, and you're not here. Or they might try to trade magic items with your character, and if they're also playing your character, they can make you say yes. Or they may actually have some sort of issue with the way you play your character normally, and that really manifests at the table when they're able to take control of your guy. I have absolutely seen players come into conflict over what their characters would do, and I would not always trust those players to control each other's characters if the opportunity came up. You assume a Game Master is going to be more respectful and responsible than that, so a lot of the time, that's who we default to. And again, if that's what you want to do, fine. But I don't know, maybe this feels obvious, but maybe it's actually useful advice that I need to say out loud. If another player is gone, you should really be respectful of that character. Don't pull pranks on them while they're gone, don't mess with them just because you think it's funny right now. Take it seriously. People put a lot of energy and effort into their D&D characters, and when they trust you with those characters, they want you to take that responsibility seriously. It doesn't matter if you're typically kind of a Leroy Jenkins player, and you run into any given situation without thinking twice. Unless it's how the other player plays their character, don't do that with their character, because you might get them killed, and that would not be fun. And it also means respecting the player's wishes. If they want you to do something, even if it's not what you would normally do, well, if they asked you to do it, do it. Again, it's something we've seen a couple of times on Critical Role. We already talked about the scenario where Sam told his fellow players to look for a specific moment where Scanlan would take some more drugs, but there's another situation with Laura where she was texting with her husband, Travis, who was running her character, and she was giving him instructions. And in that scenario, there was something that she wanted him to do, and Travis didn't want to do it. He was trying to be respectful of the character. He was trying not to get her killed while she was gone, but she wanted to do this cool, awesome, heroic thing, and he worried that if he failed, he was going to get the character killed. And the rest of the party was completely on Laura's side. She told you to do something while running her character. You should do that thing. It doesn't matter if it's risky, it's what she would do. Again, a bit of an extreme example. She was getting real-time updates by watching the live stream, so she was able to be a little bit more bold because she had a very clear idea of what was happening in the game. But once again, I hope the sentiment is clear, even if we may not find ourselves in that exact same situation at our own tables. This also brings up the question, can characters die when their player isn't at the table? I typically say No, they can get knocked unconscious, but they're not going to get murdered. We're going to figure out some way to make sure they survive. Because I don't mind killing player characters, but doing so when the player isn't at the table just does not feel good. But you might not feel the same way. Again, it comes down to the idea of whether or not you prefer simulationist games versus making concessions to allow for real-world circumstances. I don't think someone should lose their D&D character just because they had to go to their sister's graduation or whatever. But again, when we look at Critical Role, Matt is very clear with the other players that a character can die even if their player isn't there, as long as you're being played by somebody else. I don't know if Matt would ever kill a player character that he was running, but I do know that once she was being played by somebody else at the table, her death was, well, on the table. Now personally, I think that goes a little bit too far, but this depends entirely on your group. This is why communication is so important. If you don't want your character to be at risk of death while you're gone, talk to your game master and your fellow players. I like Critical Role a lot, but they have a very different approach to handling absent characters, and their approach is not right for everybody. I'm sure Matt thinks it's more realistic that a character could die, and you know what? If you were going to play somebody else's character at the table and they're going to be in life and death situations, then that is absolutely a valid perspective. Once you have another player making choices for your character, I don't think it's the GM's responsibility to insulate that character from death anymore. If that's what you want, if you want to make sure there's no chance that your character will die, there are plenty of other options for how you can handle an absent character. But the reason I have such a problem with the way it was handled on Critical Role is because the players didn't seem to realize death was on the table. So please, whatever approach you take, just try a little bit of communication. Mike, I'm sorry I was talking over you and got our brains swapped into each other's bodies. Oh, no, I didn't mean that you had to communicate more, and this is not your fault. People talk over each other all the time. They say the same thing at the same time, and it normally does not mean they swap brains. Maybe you can actually do a little bit of digging and figure out what actually caused this, because it wasn't just us talking at once. But that actually brings me to my last point today, which is that it's just important not to blame anybody when somebody can't make it to the game. It's life. It happens. At the end of the day, this is my favorite hobby. I love role-playing games. But it is just a hobby. It's one that matters a lot to me, and I think it works best when everybody makes the time for it. But sometimes that's not possible. Sometimes circumstances out of your control mean that you can't make it to a session. When that happens, I do think it's the responsibility of the other players to be respectful of your character. And maybe for you, that does mean just treating them like anybody else, treating them like another character. And certainly with the rise of digital tools like D&D Beyond or virtual tabletops, other people can get a hold of your character sheet, so it's not as complicated as it used to be. So if you want somebody else to play your character while you're gone, just make sure you're on the same page as them. That's all it is. Mike, I did some research on your phone, which I can use because I have thumbs. This is awesome. Yes, thumbs are very cool. What'd you find out? Well, it looks like at the exact moment you and I were talking over each other, a comet passed by the planet. Right at the same time, there was a solar flare and also a total eclipse. Oh, I see. So it was a massive cosmic coincidence that we couldn't do anything about or prevent? Right. And I suppose it's not possible to switch back until those same circumstances happen again. Yeah, I guess we just try to talk at the same time the next time that wildly unlikely series of events takes place. Okay, so when is the next time a comet is passing by the planet at the exact same time as a solar flare while we're also in the middle of a total eclipse? It says here... Huh. What? When is it? 50 years? 100 years? 10,000 years? It says here that it's due to happen again in 2 videos from now. Oh, yeah, a couple of days from now. That's nice. Oh, okay. Not as bad as I thought, actually. I thought we were going to be trapped like this for a long time, but it looks like things will be back to normal really soon. All we have to do is not do anything too mean to each other's bodies before we switch back, and we'll be good in a few days. Thanks so much for watching. As you've probably noticed, this is not the video that I promised at the end of the last episode. My external hard drive crashed and it ate 2 videos, so I should actually be able to get those videos out soon, probably next week. I have a lot of the raw footage. I need to refilm a little bit, but not as much as I was expecting. But right now we're in the middle of this other thing that's going on, so I'm moving the videos around a little bit, but we will come back to those. So in the meantime, make sure to like and subscribe and ring the bell, and make sure to watch this video right here, this video that is all about a character that I once played in my original D&D game, where I was a heroic, swashbuckling adventurer, and who also wound up being an important NPC in the world, so check that one out right here. Speaking of characters becoming NPCs, actually, this is kind of an excellent sequel to that video. It works out really well. Until next time, play fair, and have fun.